We pick up today with where we left off on Tuesday with an examination of the letters to the 7 churches, specifically the chapter 2, and we looked at Ephesus and Smyrna. And today we pick up with the city of Pergamum. Pergamum was by the time of the 1st century, was the capital of the province there in Asia, so a very important city. It was also known for its large library, containing over 200,000 volumes. It is estimated that it was the 2nd largest library in the ancient world, with the library at Alexandria, Egypt, being the largest. It was also a city that had a very old history, often noted as the oldest city in Asia, and so the oldest especially out of the ones that we're looking at. The other thing that was interesting for our purposes, although there are a lot of other things we could look at, it appears that Pergamum had temples to all sorts of deities, including some of the emperors, but it was among the first in Asia to build some of those temples. Temples to Zeus, to Caesar Augustus, and the healing god Asclepius marked the city of Pergamum. And some tales say that the sacrifices were going there, especially at the temple to Zeus, 24 hours a day. And so it was a constant thing. And I think that's an important aspect of some of the things that Jesus says to the church in Pergamum. As we've been looking at these letters, we've examined a couple of things. Remember that pattern that Jesus establishes of identifying himself, the statement, I know, some commendation or warning, sometimes both, as well as a couple of things about some commands and promises to the one who conquers. Well, to Pergamum, he identifies himself as the one who has the sharp two-edged sword. Here, drawing back to chapter 1, and that image that John has seen. And we talked about this idea on Tuesday about the sharp two-edged sword connected with the word. It's coming out of his mouth, so further connecting it with the word. And so to Pergamum, he identifies himself in connection with the word. He also knows some things about the church at Pergamum. Many of the things that Jesus says about the churches, when he tells them, I know something, a lot of it focuses on their works, which Pergamum does as well, but he also focuses on some issues of the city, right? And so he says, I know where you dwell. Specifically, it is a place where Satan's throne is. Now, if we think about this, right? Pergamum, the seat of government, it is also the center of idol worship, pagan god worship, and so Jesus is connecting where they are with this idea of Satan's throne. And furthermore, of course, the symbol for Asclepius, the healing god, was a serpent, and later in Revelation, John will refer to Satan as a serpent. And so, there are a lot of things here connected to this city where the church of Pergamum is found. But despite that, in general, Jesus sees a church that is holding fast, that is maintaining the teachings. Now, not everybody. We'll see that here in a minute. But most, he understands them as holding on to the faith, specifically not denying their faith through some sort of persecution that they had encountered. You did not deny my faith, deny the faith, verse 13, and here again, I forgot to ask somebody to read it. You are holding fast to my name, and you did not deny your faith in me, even during the days of my faithful witness, Antipas. So here is a church that, in general, is holding fast to the faith through persecution, some of them even losing their lives, like Antipas. But the church has remained faithful in some respects. But not everyone. There are some there who hold to the teaching of Balaam, says Jesus. Now, here we have something like the issue with the Nicolaitans. We're not completely sure exactly what the teaching of Balaam refers to, but it probably has something to do with what Jesus goes on to say. Verse 14 of chapter 2. But I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the people of Israel, so that they would eat food sacrificed to idols and practice fornication. And so the likelihood is that somebody there has done something similar. But Jesus identifies this teaching with the teaching of Balaam. Who's Balaam?
Wasn't he the prophet in the Old Testament during the Exodus?
Yeah, the prophet during the Old Testament, during the time of the Exodus, is actually, he's talked about in the book of Numbers, but that same time period. Also, the one with the talking donkey. Right? That's the other thing people know about Balaam. But evidently, Balaam had led Israel to compromise. Because there are a couple other passages, other than the passage with the donkey in Numbers chapter 22, that indicate that Balaam is the one that finds a way to get Israel to compromise, leads Israel to idolatry and immorality. And so there is a teacher or a group of teachers that Jesus identifies as Balaam. Probably not the name of the person, but instead is making this connection to the Balaam of the Old Testament. Something similar will occur with Jezebel. And so what appears to be the case is that Balaam, whoever Balaam is here, is doing the same kind of things to the church at Pergamum that Balaam had done to Israel in the Old Testament, leading them to idolatry, leading them to immorality. Now, of course, these might be metaphorical. Going after idols, for example, turning to other gods in the Old Testament was referred to as adultery. So it doesn't necessarily mean that Balaam is encouraging people to do things improperly with sex. And so it could just be a metaphorical thing. But one of the things that probably appears to be the case at Pergamum is that some of the people had compromised in eating food sacrificed to idols, like Balaam had encouraged. Right? Now, in 1 Corinthians, Paul had said that in some cases it was okay to eat food sacrificed to idols. Now, essentially, you have a situation where food would be offered in these temples to the different gods, and then would be sold through the market connected with the temple. Right? And so people would bring their offerings, and so they would come with their offerings of food, have to pay the priest for the priest to offer your food, and then on the back end they'd sell the meat to somebody else. Right? So they're getting it twice. Right. Well, kind of the way Paul takes it is, if it's in the market, you buy it, you're fine. The problem comes up if you go to a temple and participate in some of the feasts that were there. And so, like trade guilds, if you were part of a group of artisans, for example, leather workers or something like that, your guild might have its banquets, might have its meetings in a temple and eat there, and during your meetings have some sort of religious service to that god. Paul says, and what appears to be the case here with what Jesus is saying, is you can't do that. Because you're participating in that worship of that God. And so Paul said in some cases it's okay to eat food sacrificed to idols, but it was not okay to go to temples and participate in feasts. Evidently, Balaam, however, had convinced some of the people at Pergamum that this would have been fine. And so it's not so much, you've gone to the market and bought something. It's you're going to these feasts. You're compromising. But if they had taken the strong stand of we are not going to the guilds, we're not going to these feasts, it probably would have had socioeconomic consequences, because they wouldn't have been allowed to be a part of the trade guild. People would have looked at them differently, suspiciously. And so, there's a way in which this is a very strong stand to take, an appropriate stand to take, but one that would have had some very important consequences. But again, also, we have this mention of the Nicolaitans in all of this, right? So verse 14 talks about you have some there who hold the teaching of Balaam. Verse 15, so you also have some who hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Here again, was the message of the Nicolaitans similar? Right? The same kind of thing? We don't know. What we do know is Jesus didn't approve of what the Nicolaitans taught. Because there were some people there that participated in these kind of things, Jesus warns them, repent, right? Make some changes. If not, he says, I will make war. Right? Verse 16, I will come to you soon and make war against them with the sword of my mouth. Now, what do you think he means there? What is Jesus going to do if they don't repent? All right, so part of it is he's going to have maybe a further message against them, right? Because that sword of the mouth, that word, so there's going to be some sort of word, a word of condemnation, a word of judgment. But notice what it is. It's kind of this opposition. I'm coming to judge you, right? Which is probably part of it. It's not coming to exhort you, encourage you, condemn you. I'm coming to make war against you. Right? So Jesus is taking this very seriously. But there is that opportunity, right, to repent. And the promise is to the one who conquers. What is the one who conquers going to receive? Well, the first thing he says is the one who conquers will receive hidden manna. What is it? Was the translation of the word manna, right? I mean, the Hebrew word manna is what is it? And so when you say manna in Hebrew, it means what is it? But what is manna? Okay, it fell from heaven. In what context? Yeah, so again, we have this Exodus motif with Balaam, and then Jesus' promise is, I'm going to give you the hidden manna connected with the Exodus as well, right? So in saying I'm going to give you hidden manna, what do you think he's saying?
I'll give you sustenance.
All right, yeah, so sustenance, provision. Also, of course, we could probably make a connection here with Jesus identifying himself as the bread of life in John chapter 6. And in John chapter 6, there's also that connection between Jesus as the bread of life and the manna that came to the Exodus. The other thing, of course, would be that he's giving you the hidden manna in contrast to the food sacrificed to idols. Right? And so here they are eating the food sacrificed to idols, and Jesus promises them, right, something else. Which, of course, is further interesting because the food sacrificed to idols, you are getting the idol's food. But Jesus turns around and says, I'm going to provide you with food. Right? Because the idols didn't really give you anything. Of course, people believed in they're going to give me healing or prosperity or something. But Jesus is promising the provision, the manna given by God to provide for his people. The other thing given to the one who conquers is a white stone. I mean, In the 21st century, okay, you know, give me a little more here, right? It's like, what's the big deal? Now, maybe we could say, okay, it says there, verse 17, I will give a white stone, and on the white stone is written a new name that no one knows except the one who receives it. Okay, you know, this idea of a new name, but a white stone, what's the significance of that? Well, scholars suggest that there's a couple things that could possibly be behind this. You know, there's not a distinct this is it. White stones and black stones would be used in judgment or in making decisions, with the white stone meaning that you were favorable. Like if it was you were being judged innocent or guilty, you received a white stone if you were innocent, or if the judgment was favorable. Sometimes white stones were used for admission to events, and there is some suggestion that the temple feasts required people to bring a white stone to gain admission. So maybe that's the connection here. Sometimes white stones were given as a token to the victors of races. And so you just ran this marathon or this 100-yard dash or whatever, and you got this stone that you would then exchange for the real prize, right? But at the end of the race, you would be given this, and then you would go receive the exchange. So maybe that is what is being suggested here. The other thing, of course, is that the color white also suggests righteousness and purity throughout the book of Revelation, which we'll see in a couple other places. So maybe that is behind it as well. So the giving of a white stone suggested something favorable, suggested this was something positive and very prized. And on it was a new name. What name? Here again, it's like we're kind of given some indication. Is it Jesus' name? Right? It says a new name that no one knows except the one who receives it, and so maybe not Jesus' name. Is it a new name given to a believer upon death? That doesn't seem to be. There's nowhere in the rest of the New Testament that suggests that, but maybe that's what it's talking about. In chapter 3, verse 12, Jesus promises the church at Philadelphia, I will write on you the name of my God and the name of the city of my God. So is it connected with that? Again, we don't know. But it's not some sort of magical thing. A lot of belief in ancient times of the powers of names and magically. But by having the right to give a new name, Jesus is suggesting possession, ownership. Right? I'm taking care of you. You belong to me. Questions about the church, the letter to the church at Pergamum.